Will Christopher Nolan's next film be shot entirely on IMAX? Nolan's most recent Oscar-winning blockbuster, Oppenheimer, used both IMAX and 65mm large format photography to express his vision. The film was presented in full IMAX aspect ratio 1:4:3:1 for a total of 70 minutes of Oppenheimer's 180-minute runtime. Is it finally time to have a full-length Christopher Nolan 70mm IMAX film? Let's take a brief look at some of Christopher Nolan's most impactful releases and his use of celluloid. In this video, we will evaluate Nolan's use of film, from humble beginnings shooting Super 8 as a boy and 16mm short films aimed at festivals, all the way to last year's Oscar-winning Oppenheimer, which utilized 65 and 70mm large format film, capturing Christopher Nolan's most impulsive filmic choice: huge images. But why does Nolan prefer IMAX and large format? What does it bring to the art form that 35mm and digital do not? Let's review. When Christopher Nolan turned 8 years old, his father gifted him an old Super 8 camera. In the basement of his childhood home, a young Chris made space epics inspired by Star Wars using action figures and amateur stop motion. In the Nolan variations by Tom Schoen, we learn Nolan was already building sets for these short films using a ping pong table, egg crates, toilet paper rolls, and powder to recreate explosions. Even as a boy, Chris Nolan was using practical sets and real film to make movies. Nolan continued his use of film with his first two features, Following, which used 16mm black and white film, cost-effective for the self-financed 1 hour and 9-minute noir, and Memento. Memento used 35mm color and black and white film to create a stark difference between the scenes moving forward in Guy Pearce's memory, 35mm black and white, and the scenes moving backwards in color, which represent Pearce's retrograde short-term amnesia, which propels the film in both directions. He would bookend this same technique 23 years later with Oppenheimer, in which color film represents J. Roberts' subjective point of view and the black and white Strauss's objective point of view. This time far larger than 35mm, this time in 70mm 15 perf IMAX. So why IMAX? The IMAX film experience audiences know today has much more in common with the epic films of the golden age of Hollywood. Movies like Lawrence of Arabia, shot with Super Panavision 5 perf 65mm and projected to audiences on 70mm in an aspect ratio of 2:1:1, while today's IMAX aspect ratio is a much thicker 1:4:3:1. The effect is similar: full immersion. Ben-Hur, West Side Story, Cleopatra, and 2001: A Space Odyssey were all famously projected in 70mm upon their initial releases, and many working filmmakers today credit their aha moment to a screening at a large format Hollywood release in their childhoods. Another popular film shot in Super Panavision is Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight, which in preparation for its release had the infamous director retrofit 100 theaters with an anamorphic 70mm film projector, so the screenings would be 100% precisely what the director wanted. In this case, what Quentin Tarantino wanted. So why does Christopher Nolan want IMAX? Why 70mm 15 perf? What does any of this stuff even mean? Let's go a little deeper. Unless you already know this stuff, in that case, you can skip to the next chapter and you rock, because this stuff can get a little complicated, to be honest. But don't worry, I can talk you through it if you don't. Okay, so 70mm refers to the length of the film frame. Take a look at a 70mm negative versus a traditional 35mm negative, which spans a distance of only 21.95mm. More width equals more surface area of film chemicals to interact with light as it passes through a camera lens for 1/24th of a second. The more surface area we have, the greater the resolution of an image we can produce. Think of it like pixels, but instead, it's organic film grain. The greater the pixel density, the higher fidelity the image produced. And the same goes for IMAX film. You see, a regular 70mm film strip is referred to as 70mm 5 perf, which means there are 5 small perforations that span the height of the film frame. And now you know that the film frame spans a distance of 70 millimeters, so you end up with a beautiful widescreen effect. And this is exactly how old Hollywood classics like 2001 were presented. This is not how IMAX 70mm 15 perf is presented. Maybe it just clicked for you. You get it now. 15 perforations. But where do they fit? How does it work? The IMAX Corp actually turned the entire projector on its side in order to be able to pull the film through the lens, utilizing the latitude of the negative to increase the height of the frame 3x. And instead of taking up 5 perforations, it takes 15. 70mm 15 perf is big. But why big? Just because? Or is there a deeper, more personal reason Christopher Nolan chooses to use the biggest possible image format to not only project in, but to shoot in? Nolan does not merely want to blow his images up. He wants to make sure they are shot big.
To really feel it on a gut sense, you need that large format.
This epic size and scope envelops the theater goer. In conjunction with Nolan's famously loud score and sound effects, the IMAX presentations of his films devour the viewer's senses and seduce the mind to maybe, just maybe, let go and enter the world of the film. So how did IMAX get here? Initially, the first ever permanent IMAX installation was built at the Cinesphere Theatre in Ontario Place, Toronto in 1971. Soon after, the first permanent IMAX dome opened its doors in San Diego's posh Balboa Park in 73, doubling as a planetarium, showing science, space, and educational documentaries, as many did for the next 30 years or so. That is, until 2008, when Christopher Nolan released The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight is the first major motion picture to film with IMAX 70mm film cameras. Nolan famously said that if the IMAX cameras were good enough for Mount Everest, they were good enough for The Dark Knight. The film ends up with 28 minutes of IMAX footage, which resulted from the biggest action sequences being shot and presented in IMAX. This allowed for the action sequences to appear to open up and feel like these big special moments. It definitely worked, and even today on Blu-ray and 4K physical media, the screen still increases for an IMAX approved aspect ratio. I still watch The Dark Knight like this every time. It's incredible. The vistas as well in Hong Kong and New York are city symphonies unto themselves. Now, I should be fair to digital and go over what some big-name, top-tier Hollywood directors think of digital, as it must have its upside. What do George Lucas, James Cameron, and Denis Villeneuve have in common? They have all shot and directed space epics using digital camera photography. So let's talk about it. Cinematographer Greg Fraser, who shot Dune Part 2 with Denis Villeneuve and The Batman, directed by Matt Reeves. Reeves, something of a hot commodity in Hollywood right now, is shooting gorgeous films with substance and subtext. Fraser uses lighting, focus, and digital photography. Fraser says what he appreciates most about digital photography is how forgiving it is. He believes the sensors are so good they can adjust focus, color, and texture later in post-production. Film purists may scoff at this, and I may want to as well, but Fraser's body of work speaks for itself, and he stands out as a premier cinematographer in Hollywood today. To note, Fraser and Villeneuve finished the film by re-editing the entire digital movie with a 35mm camera to achieve the look and feel of film, and again, blew it up to a 1:4:3:1 on only 12 screens worldwide. I was lucky enough to see Dune Part 2 on 7015 IMAX in New York City, and I do have to say, it was great. I mean, it was so good. It looked amazing. It was incredible. And being a 70mm purist, I've been doing this for a long time. It looked gorgeous. And I do know that they shot it initially on digital. Now, speaking of top-tier cinematography, Christopher Nolan works with the best. Wally Pfizer shot in IMAX with Nolan on The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight Rises, and since has left cinematography for some directorial efforts. Since Interstellar, Christopher Nolan has been working with director of photography Hoyte van Hoytema. Hoyte has practically pioneered all new techniques to utilize the immense, heavy, and loud IMAX cameras to their fullest. This includes just picking them up and putting the behemoths on his shoulders. With every release after Interstellar and beginning with Batman Begins, each film Nolan made with IMAX had not only more IMAX footage, but the team was getting better and better at using the cameras. In fact, they began to develop new systems and speak directly with IMAX about just what type of systems might work best on any new cameras they might be making. This all brings us to Nolan's last two releases, Tenet and Oppenheimer. My research shows me that both Tenet and Oppenheimer both had around 70 minutes of 1:4:3:1 IMAX aspect ratio with a global success both critically and financially. It seems Christopher Nolan can make this next film anything he wants. I believe if ever there were a time that Christopher Nolan had the power to demand as much very expensive 70mm IMAX film as he could get his hands on, now is the time. So I guess the question really is Nolan ready to give us the biggest film in history? Will we get a complete feature film shot and presented entirely on IMAX 70mm film stock? I believe now is the time. And hey, if I'm right or wrong, I'll still be the first in line to buy advance tickets to whatever is coming next. I can't wait to see what's coming up from Chris Nolan. This team has not let me down yet, so if you're like me and you want to know what's coming after Oppenheimer, why not subscribe? I'm a brand new channel, and I could use the algorithmic assistance. Also, leave a like and stay tuned for more Chris Nolan content. He's my favorite film director of all time, and I've got tons more to say. See you next time. This was Film School Dad.
The infamous scene 16, you may remember from the screenplay, which is the moment where Niels Bohr says, can you hear the music? He says, yes, I can. Cut to scene 16, which is just a ton of shit.